Episode 264, Into the Forest. This is the Change Underground for the 19th of July 2021. I'm your host, John Moore. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Start off with another big shout out to an individual who identifies themselves as somebody on the Buy Me a Coffee system. Thanks for the coffee, somebody. There's a link in the show notes if you feel the need to keep me caffeinated in this show on the road. I should also point out that 10% of everything Change Underground and World Organic News makes, either in the form of coffees or course sales, goes to support the Bubugo Conservation Trust in Uganda and their sustainable farming programs. Now then, I realised this episode was due last week, but during the research I was somewhat overwhelmed by the enormity of the task in front of us all. There are times when that task, I summarise as decarbonise the air and recarbonise the soil, seems terrifyingly out of reach. Then someone will say something and I'm back on the horse, even if we are struggling against this quote from Caitlin Johnston that is on the Facebook group page. Quote, "And in the end, it turned out that killing the ecosystem was easier than taking away rich people's rocket money," end quote. So there will be a missed week in the podcast, but I'm back with a fire in the belly. Earth's calendar year from the site biomimicry.net, link in the show notes, compresses life on Earth into a calendar year, to give something tangible our minds can understand rather than wrangling with 4.5 billion years. So what does it tell us? Well, it tells us in that year, February 25 represents life's kick-off on the planet. Just over a month later, on the 28th of March, the engine we know as photosynthesis evolved. So it has been with us for some time. There are other things that happen, but we'll jump to November with the arrival of fungi, fish and land plants on the 15th, 20th and 22nd respectively. So that's almost a whole 11 months out of the 12 we're using to represent life on Earth. And December is when things start to get interesting for humans. All the beasties from amphibians through reptiles, mammals and birds happened over December. The dinosaurs bundied off on the 25th, and you'll notice we've travelled from the formation of the planet to the extinction of the dinosaurs over the period from New Year's Day to Christmas Day, and still no mention of we human types. That should give you some idea of how recently we've arrived, and we will come to that later, how much we have changed things. We must wait until the 31st of December at 11:30 for our first bipedal ancestors. Ourselves, Homo sapiens, arrive at 23:36, 24 minutes before midnight. Agriculture becomes established at 1 minute to midnight on this last day of the year, and the Industrial Revolution at 2 seconds before midnight. Now, in the life of the world, the 45 billion years as a calendar year, we've managed to disrupt carbon, nitrogen and water cycles in just 2 seconds of that year. Impressive and all as this may seem, these cycles are necessary for us and the rest of life on the planet to be done, to survive. So well done us, and anyway. From the arrival of agriculture at 1 minute to midnight, one key effect is both obvious, although not linear, is expanding, and that's deforestation. There were times when the forests returned only to be cut back later, say following the Black Death in Europe, for instance. But the general correlation has been increasing human populations and decreasing tree cover. Put into the context of the calendar year, I find this overwhelming. Fair enough, as a species, we didn't know what we were doing for much of that last minute of the year, but we do now. In an article dated the 11th of April 2011 from the journal Nature, No Trees, No Humans, 5 consequences of the complete loss of trees are covered. They are 1, filthy air, 2, lifeless soil, 3, chronic drought, 4, and obviously this one, no tree-based products, not just timber but fruit and whatnot, and 5 water wars. Now, the complete loss of tree cover is something I find difficult to imagine, but we can all see the effects listed happening now, except perhaps for number 4. Another site, Our World in Data, suggests we've lost a third of our tree cover since the Industrial Revolution. This is something we must halt and reverse. To put it another way, I've placed a pic on the blog post show notes over at worldorganicnews.com/episode 264 that explains it quite succinctly. Here's another quote. Earth is 4.6 billion years old. Let's scale that to 46 years. We've been here for 4 hours. The Industrial Revolution was a minute ago. In that time, we've destroyed about 50% of the world's forests, end quote. And it's getting worse. Who'd have thunk it? I realise there's some discrepancy between those figures, but the thrust of the argument is fairly straightforward. The more of us there are, the less trees we seem to preserve. Now then, for my UK listeners, the following won't come as a surprise, but I'll fill in the background for the rest of the world. The UK government has decided to build a second high-speed rail link between the capital and somewhere up north. To do so, they need a corridor for laying tracks, naturally enough. However, the chosen route requires the cutting down, or more accurately, clear felling, of about 108 ancient woodlands, according to the Woodland Trust, link in the show notes. Again, for those outside the UK, an ancient woodland is one dating to before 1600 in England and Wales and before 1750 in Scotland. So not that ancient by, say, the standards of the New Guinea Highlands, but certainly old enough to fight for. Now, all this was brought to my attention by Kalina from the Facebook group Half Wild Jersey. She messaged me with a request to spread a petition to stop this wanton destruction, and hence this episode. I'm thinking this is probably just for UK residents, but who's to know? And who's to know how many UK residents my listeners will know? So the link is in the show notes and on the blog post. Please spread the word. We must preserve as much as we can before it won't matter. We need to start replanting trees and hedgerows and wild meadow flowers and, well, you get the message, while maintaining the tree cover we already have. Let's, with apologies to the Blues Brothers, let's put the word in the streets. Our lazy butts are in this too. So if you have any questions, thoughts or suggestions, please join the Facebook group and ask them there. There's no entry requirements. Just search for the Change Underground podcast group on the Book of Faces. Or there's a link in the show notes and in the transcript over at worldorganicnews.com/episode 264. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Thank you all for listening, and I'll be back next week.